Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Grant Kastner. I am Extempore's community manager. Welcome to our 2022 PD Extravaganza. This is the second part one of a workshop. This is the second workshop, part one of our PD Extravaganza. We have 4 total. The first one was from Dr. Fernandez this morning. Now we have Dr. Florencia Henshaw. Thank you so much, Florencia, for being here with us. We are thrilled to have you. After just one thing, after Dr. Henshaw presents with us today, there will be a little survey. There's just a feedback form. It's a Google form that you'll receive at the end of this session, where you can enter that not only to provide Dr. Henshaw with valuable feedback that she would like to receive, but also to get a chance to enter into our giveaway for our PD Extravaganza. With that said, Florencia, take it away.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Can everybody see me, hear me? Okay, we're good. Okay, beautiful. So thank you all for coming to my session, first session. Then we have another session tomorrow, same time, same channel. That is a total old person thing to say, right? The whole same time, same channel. Sorry. So my workshop, or the 2 sessions, are going to focus on interpersonal speaking. So one mode in particular and one modality in particular. And it's still big, right? Even though we're talking about one mode and one modality, there's still a lot that we could unpack. So I have divided it as follows. Today, we're going to be talking about some fundamental aspects of interpersonal communication. We're going to talk a little bit about some definitions, like what we could consider or not to be interpersonal communication. And then we're going to talk a lot about learner-learner interaction. There could be other interlocutors, and that's what we're going to explore in session 2. So session 2, we're going to talk about interacting with the whole class, so interaction with the teacher, as well as with other speakers of the target language. But today, we're going to be talking a lot about learner-learner interaction. And I'd like to start by telling you a little bit about my interest in interaction. I've been fascinated by interaction for quite a while. My dissertation focused on learner-learner interaction, and specifically, I looked at the interaction between second language learners and heritage language learners. I teach Spanish, and many of our classes are mixed. We get second language and heritage language learners together, and we do a lot of pair work, group work. So the students are working with each other a lot. And so I wanted to know what happens during interaction, and then what happens as a result of interaction. I am also OPI certified. If you're familiar with ACFL, ACFL has this assessment that is an oral proficiency interview. And as the name implies, it is an interview. It is interaction between you, the tester, and the test taker. And I find the OPI also fascinating in itself because it has a structure, but yet you need to be flexible to what the person is telling you. You need to be able to assess the level of the person and then adjust the questions accordingly. The OPI training to me was one of the best professional development things I have done. It was very much eye-opening to understand what somebody can do, to have realistic expectations, to understand the levels, proficiency levels better, and then to be more cognizant of the types of questions we ask, how you ask a question, how that affects the response that you get. And it also made me reflect a lot on how many things that I expect out of my students are sort of all in my head, is what I would answer, but you have to understand, what did you really ask and what could be all the possible answers to it. And also my own personal experiences. English is my second language. And when I was learning English, and learning English is a very nice way of putting it, I was watching sitcoms. That's what I was doing, and listening to music. I met an American boy, and I wanted to call him up and ask him out, and I was very nervous. So what I did was, because interaction was so difficult, I turned it into a presentational task. So I wrote everything that I was going to say, and I called him when I knew that he wasn't home, so I could just leave a message. And it's just like, that reflects how terrifying interaction can be. And interaction over the phone more, but interaction is just such a fascinating aspect of language learning. So how do you feel about interpersonal communication? finish the sentence. Interpersonal communication is one adjective. Don't overthink it. Just type the first adjective that comes to your mind. Fun. Okay, fun, important. Okay. It's real. Ooh, I like that. Challenging, scary, risky. Yes. Exciting. Communicating. Yes. Overwhelming. Catherine, I agree. Vulnerable. Karen, I love that adjective. Yes. Yes. Stressful. Rich. Okay. All right. Meaningful. Ooh, Claudia, I love that. Okay. Yes. Authentic says, ooh, authentic. We've been talking about authentic a lot lately, right, on Twitter. Risk taking. Yes. Okay. Very good. Dynamic. Ooh, I love that. I don't know your name. I only see your username, but I love whoever said dynamic. I love that adjective very much so. Okay. So yes, a lot of what you're saying points to the one thing about interpersonal communication is that it's tricky, right? Interpretive communication seems to be where our students do the best, and most language learners tend to do better at comprehension than production, right? That is accepted universal, and always comprehension precedes production. We can understand a lot more than we can say for a while in our language development. Now, presentational is sort of in the middle because you have more time, right, to get your message across. But interpersonal is definitely the trickiest of all the modes. Now, this, I have to tell you, is also my level in Italian, right? So in Italian, I can understand quite a bit and good, right? Even like TV shows, presentational, if you give me some time, I can write an email. And then interpersonal, for some reason, somebody asked me a question and it seems like all of the Italian has escaped my head. So when we think about conversations, some of the adjectives you use in terms of authentic and connections, right? We do think of this opportunity to connect with someone else, right? A conversation implies more than one person. We actively engage in meaning making and meaning understanding. And there's immediacy of information. We convey something that possibly you want to know almost immediately. It's relevant. You want to understand it on the spot. It's not like, okay, let me think about it, I'll understand it tomorrow. It doesn't work that way, right? It's very immediate. And if you ask students who want to learn the language, what do they want to do with it? They want to have a conversation in the language. Usually that's what students say, right? That learning a language is to have a conversation. But it is definitely harder than it seems. First of all, there are other people involved. It's a group project, right? It's not just you and you in control of everything. You depend on others. Second, processing time is much shorter. Even when it is written, like right now on the chat, you typed things. We still have to process it relatively quickly. It's different than, for example, reading something or writing something when you have time to write, revise, etc. And interaction or interpersonal speaking involves input and output. We need to be processing incoming information, understanding, and then very quickly, fairly quickly, our brain needs to produce the message in response. And precisely this connection between input and output is what Michael Long posited in the interaction hypothesis, that these episodes where learners engage in both understanding and conveying meaning, interaction, facilitates language development because it connects input, internal learner capacities, particularly selective attention, and I'll get to that in 1 minute, and output in productive ways. So according to the interaction hypothesis and to interactionist, right, or interaction approach, if you will, these negotiation episodes that occur during interaction are thought to be facilitative of language development. So it's not just input, as Krashen would say, and obviously it's not just output. It's this interaction between input and output that helps our language develop. So during negotiation episodes, sometimes there is communication breakdown. Somebody says something, you didn't understand it, you ask for clarification, or you provide a clarification. So we negotiate with each other, with our interlocutors, to achieve or increase understanding. However, in many cases, communication does not break down. You can be fully comprehensible and somebody might still provide a correction, if you will, or somebody might still provide feedback on your form or how you said something, right? And so negotiation episodes can also happen even when we're fully comprehensible. And the reason why I want to highlight these two things is because one critique of interpersonal tasks or interaction, an interaction approach in general, is that it's true that many times with context, with gestures, with anything else, communication does not break down, right? Communication breakdowns don't happen that often, especially once learners are, intermediate enough. And so the idea is that, well, then what do? Communication doesn't break down good enough, then you never improve. No, negotiation episodes can happen even if you're fully comprehensible. It is still part of interaction. So a couple of examples. In this case, you could say that there could be a misunderstanding. Obviously, we don't know for sure. But if the teacher asks, what are you doing this weekend? And the student responds, go pool. Did the student mean like they're going to play pool, or are they going to go swimming, right, at pool? So in this case, most likely there is a communication breakdown. We need to ask a clarification request, right? And sometimes we do that with mimicking the activity, and then the student understands what the two options are, and then the student understands where the issue happened. There may or may not, and that's okay. And that's part of interaction, right? That sometimes, remember that it says learner internal capacities, particularly selective attention, right? So they may not pick up on that, and that's okay. We don't need to stop and do a whole lesson on prepositions or go to the pool, right? We don't need to do all that. Sometimes just indicating that something else, something there didn't work, and maybe the student just chooses to rephrase to go to swim good enough for this level to clarify, to be comprehensible, and then we can move on with the interaction. Now, this is an example of a classic recast. Michael Long was a big fan of recast because they are the least obtrusive of feedback methods, right? You can provide a correction and keep going with the conversation. And then once again, learner internal capacities. If the learner notices that there is a correction, great. Then we could say that it's more likely to have an effect. If the learner didn't notice it, the conversation still goes on. It doesn't mean that it was a waste of time. It just means that it is up to the learner and the learner internal capacities to notice certain things, to process certain things. The teacher only has a little control. And so in this case, for example, what are you doing this weekend? Make homework. You could say that is comprehensible, right? And for a novice learner, this is probably good enough, and you wouldn't stop to say, I'm not understanding. Yes, you understand what the student tried to say, right? And so the teacher can provide a recast in the forms of a reformulation. You need to do homework. The student notices, especially if you do that little emphasis. Yes, do, yes, very good. Do you have a lot? Do you have to do a lot of homework? And then there's that emphasis yet again. Now, Michael Long would say that even without that part in the middle, right, with just what are you doing this weekend, make homework, do you have to do a lot of homework? That is also a recast. There was a reformulation. The student didn't even notice, kept going, right? So sometimes we do it more than once to see if the student is more likely to notice. Okay, so let's talk about two key aspects of interpersonal communication, because many times we see textbooks that label activities as interpersonal, right? But when you look at it, you wonder, is this truly interpersonal or not? To me, not necessarily what ACFL says, to me, interpersonal communication has two key aspects. The first one is that it has to be a purposeful, meaningful exchange of information, ideas, opinions, etc. But it has to be purposeful and meaningful, and it has to involve some kind of a back and forth. And you'll see that I'll keep coming back to back and forth several times when we unpack different examples. And the other key aspect for me is that there is an information gap. That means that the interlocutors don't know exactly what the other person will say. So if something is entirely scripted to the point that I know your lines, you know your lines, that is not interpersonal communication. But the question is, because I know ACTFL, when talking about interpersonal communication, does use the word spontaneous to describe it, or real time, right? Which would be synchronous. I would say not necessarily. When we start to reflect about different ways in which we engage in interpersonal communication, that's not always the case. Interpersonal could certainly be asynchronous, right? So email, for example, is oftentimes interpersonal. I say something, you respond, I respond back and forth we go, exchanging information that we need for a purpose, for example. Social media, we do this every day, right? We post something, somebody responds, you respond to the person, and so forth. I also think that the spontaneous part of interpersonal communication has been at times misunderstood. So that's why I don't use the word spontaneous to describe interpersonal communication. I think some preparation is actually good for interpersonal communication. For our learners, of course, yes, they need that time to prepare. But even in our daily life, right? When you go to a job interview, for example, you do some preparation, right? It is still interpersonal communication, but you went in there prepared. I think that the spontaneous part may happen in the sense that you don't know exactly what they will ask you, but you might anticipate some questions and then be prepared to answer those questions. But of course, not something that is entirely scripted or something where we're reading the whole time. If we are simply producing something that someone else told us to say, that's not interpersonal communication. Even if we wrote it down and then all we're doing is reading it and acting it out, that's not interpersonal communication. I also want to emphasize that it is not just one thing, right? So interpersonal is not just speaking. Interpersonal is not just the fact that there are multiple students or multiple interlocutors involved. You can have many people and yet it's not interpersonal. And interpersonal is not just spontaneous production. So it has to have, for me, the two things, the information gap and the back and forth. And usually that back and forth tends to be missing in a lot of the examples that I see being, shared in textbooks and things like that in terms of what is interpersonal. Even when, on social media groups and somebody says, what do you do for your interpersonal assessment? Some of the ideas I see to me are not interpersonal, right? Many times what I see is something more along the lines of what I would call a speaking assignment. And so we tend to associate interpersonal with just speaking for an audience. And of course, we know that could be presentational. That's not necessarily interpersonal. So the classic example of record a video on Flipgrid, which now is called Flip. So I have to update all of my slides. Thank you, Flipgrid. And then respond to two classmates, right? Classic example that I've seen many times. Is that interpersonal? Más o menos?
No.
No? What do we say? Let's see what opinions we have. Yes, there's no back and forth. No? Okay, no. Okay. I see a lot of no's. Okay. The exchange stops there. Yes, Shannon, very good. A little, says Mirna. I love that. It's a little. Okay. Right. So that's really what's missing, right? That it just stops there. Do we even know if the person read or heard the responses? They don't have to do anything with it, right? So to me, there's no back and forth at all. And second, yes, there's that chance that some of the responses could be very generic to the point that maybe they did not understand a single word the classmate said, and they're posting some generic response, and maybe that's good enough. And that's definitely now that we don't have any kind of communication going. This is probably what I would call presentational with audience participation, right? We prepare this video and we record it and we post it, and then the audience has some kind of reaction to it, but there's no back and forth. The person who posted the video has no interest, from what it seems here, in going back and engaging with the audience, right? So it's missing that back and forth. And then there's the other special case of simulations, interpersonal simulations. And yes, since this is sponsored by Extempore, I have to talk about this. So have you ever seen the AP exam, the conversation section of the AP exam, or have you ever taken the OPIC, the computer version of the OPI? Or have you ever seen the APPLE, the interpersonal section of the APPLE? Do people have experience with that? You can tell me very quickly. AP, yes. None of them, Kaylin? Okay. None of them, Maria Jose? All right. Some of them, yes. AP, APPLE. Okay. Never, Mirna. Oh, okay. So, all right. So I'll give you a very, very quick description of what it is if you're not familiar with it. So the APPLE, the OPIC, even the AP exam function very, very similarly. And I'm talking about OPIC, not OPI, right? So with a little C, the computer one. What happens is the computer says something, has a recording of a person asking a question, and then there's like a little tone, and the student or the test taker is supposed to respond on the spot, right? You don't have time to prepare. You don't have time to say, wait, can you clarify? Can you tell me that again? There's nothing. You heard it, go. And that's a little bit of how it works. AP exam, I know they have other instructions, right? They need to respond in a certain way, accepting, declining, right? There's more things they need to keep in mind. But for the most part, it works the same, that there's a recording, you listen to it once, recording automatically starts, and you're supposed to respond. Extempore, if you have used Extempore, works the same way, or you can make it work the same way, where you can record questions and then the recording starts automatically, the student responds, you move on. Now, all of these are simulations. They're supposed to simulate the idea of somebody asking you a question and you responding on the spot. But there's absolutely no back and forth. And when you think about it, especially if we're talking about novice and intermediate learners, what they need is a lot of this, the clarification, the negotiation, the ability to ask questions, the ability to get feedback, right? To be like, that's not what I asked you. Let me ask you again, right? What happens in an exchange with a live person, not a machine? So these are interpersonal simulations, but this is not what I would consider interpersonal communications or assignments. Definitely good preparation for interpersonal, yes, and I use it. I use Extempore precisely for that. I want the students to get comfortable with answering questions on the spot to the best of their abilities, not to be preparing an answer each and every time. I'll talk more about that tomorrow in the session tomorrow. So let's unpack some examples before we keep going and talk about some of the concerns related to learner-learner interaction. So I'm going to give you a minute to take a look at each example, and then on the chat, you can tell me how you feel about it. And it's okay. Let me clarify this. This is not about saying that everything is beautiful or that everything is terrible. I just want you to think more critically about the example. Think about what you like about it, what you could tweak about it. Is it interpersonal? Is it not? You can comment on anything you like. This is not about approving or disapproving of things. So the first example to unpack, take turns asking each other questions about the student schedule. So there's one schedule and the students work in pairs. They're supposed to take turns asking. So for example, one student could ask, what days does the student have math class? And then the other student would answer Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, right? For example. And then your turn to ask something, I answer, and so forth. So it's minimum 4 different questions. You cannot ask yes, no questions. Okay, so what do we think about this? If somebody prefers to, turn on your mic, that's okay with me too. Okay, so some of the comments I'm seeing. So the comments that I'm seeing are related to the information gap, as well as the purpose. Right, so some of the questions, so Maria Jose asked, why are they asking about that? What is it for, right? There's no purpose, say Suzanne as well, okay? And then I see Grant, Chelsea, and also Suzanne said that they all have the same information. Grant said that it doesn't feel meaningful because of that. It's because we all know all of the information. And it also defeats the purpose, right? Why are you asking me if you see this information as well? Okay, Nicole had a suggestion, maybe like it would be good to add in personal questions, so personalize it, right, Nicole, if I'm understanding, right? So maybe ask follow-ups where it's about, do you also have math class on Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever, okay? Shannon says, I like the information. Yes, the amount of information to talk about, but both students have access to the same info, so it's not really necessary to have a conversation. Exactly, yes. Mirna says that it feels like it could be an exchange, but it feels like it's all scripted, right? And that's because everybody has, there's no gap, right? I know exactly what my partner is going to answer because I'm looking at the schedule myself, right? Okay. Why would you ask questions about something you can see yourself, Ronnie? I'm wondering the same thing. Wendy said that students could have different schedules. Yes, right? So now we're tweaking it, we're making it better. So now we have an information gap that if you have one schedule and I have a different schedule, and we have to see if these two students have similar classes, they're taking the same class. Okay, so now we've improved it. So there is an exchange, and then we can add a purpose to it, right? To see how many classes they have in common, for example, right? Oh, Kaylin made a comment about the limiting yes or no questions. Okay, I like that you noticed that. It says limiting yes or no questions makes sense to try and elicit more sophisticated language structures, but this is not what happens in real life. Yes, Caitlin, right? So this is very much like language practice, right? We want to push them to practice something in particular, but in a way we are turning maybe the conversation into something a little bit more unnatural because it's not what you would want to ask. Now you have to think so hard of the, wait a minute, I cannot ask you yes or no, what can I? Now we sort of moved away from the meaning to just accomplishing a very language specific thing, right? Memorized, I don't know that it would be memorized, Neri. I think it depends. I'm not sure that they could memorize it, although they could be asking questions that they know of, right? Rehearsed questions. I mean, that could happen, but if they're novice, that is to be expected. Right, so change it for an info gap, right? We need 2 different schedules, for example, yes. Okay, so Dora asked a question that is a good question. Does this not provide back and forth interaction? Yes, but remember, Dora, that I said not just one thing, right? We need both things. So we need back and forth and we need an information gap, right, between the participants. It has to be meaningful, purposeful information gap. In this case, when the student is asking a question, what time does it have math classes? There's no purpose for me to ask that because I know the information. right? I'm not asking that question for any other reason other than my teacher told me to ask you, but that's not a purpose. Let's clarify that, right? So a purpose means like, what are we doing with the information, right? I think Linda made that comment, right? Could we bring purpose to the exchange of information? Exactly, right? They need to do something with the information. Linda, very good, yes. Okay, and Wendy says again, it is practice, right? Okay. So again, this was not about, yes, no, approve, disapprove. This is about thinking critically about these activities. So maybe it is a way of sort of preparing them. I would still want them to do something more purposeful than taking turns asking questions. But if you need them to practice asking questions for maybe one specific assessment that you're going to be asking them, then okay, I guess you could do practice. I would still want to try different schedules, right? So that at least there is more of a purpose for asking questions. Yes. Okay, let's keep going. Example number 2. I don't know if this is easy to see. I'm sorry, with the italics, it ended up looking a little bit weird. So I'll explain. So there's student A and student B, and the instructions, so that means that they cannot see each other. So student A only sees student A, student B only sees student B. Student A says this is a class schedule of a college student in the US. The names of the classes are missing. So all they have are things like Monday, Wednesday at 9, Monday, Wednesday at 10, etc. And it says your partner has the information you need. Ask your partner questions to complete the schedule. And then student B says, this is a class schedule. Your partner needs some of the information. Answer their questions to help them complete the schedule. And student B has the complete thing. So student A has blanks, but student B has all of the information. So take a minute if you need to, and tell me what you think, what you like, what you don't like. Catherine commented, I'm sorry if the comments, I think the comments are for this one, right? I think so. Person B doesn't need anything from A. Good observation, that is true. Daniela also commented that communication is only one way. Okay. Maria Jose says, it seems a little formulaic. The question is the same each time. Okay. That's not a bad thing if they're novice, question mark. Okay, yes. Good for practice, there's no follow-up. Okay, continuing the back and forth, yes. Tanya says that only one student is benefiting from the activity. Okay, and Mirna says, what is the purpose? All right, I'm loving all these comments. Okay, there's so much to unpack. Okay, let me address first some of the comments that keep coming back. This idea that one student has all of the info and the other doesn't, right? So that the communication is one way. Yes, some tasks, this is not a task, but some tasks can be one-way info gaps, which means that one person has information that the other one needs, and that's it. There's no need to have gaps on both sides. So that by itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So that happens sometimes. If I know everything and you need information from me, that happens, right? In real life, so to speak. What is the purpose? Well, I guess the purpose would be to complete the schedule, right? That could be the purpose. Caitlin suggested change it. They have the same schedule, but split in half. Okay. And then Shannon said the information is organized in the same order. Yes, Shannon, my students too. That is the issue with this activity. This activity is dictation. And the students will figure out very quickly that all you need to do is just tell me the names of the classes. I don't even know what chemistry is. Doesn't matter. I just need to write it. Doesn't matter if they know what geography is. No, they just need to write it. So when you turn it into straightforward dictation, where all they're doing is saying words, spelling out words, and somebody else writes them, we lose meaning, right? If you can accomplish it without understanding, then that's an issue, right? Then it's not quite interpersonal communication. We need to change it so they're not simply reading out things for their partner, and their partner writes them down, and then they're done, right? They didn't understand anything, but they're done. Then we need to change it, right? When the issue here is that it is straightforward dictation. Okay, how do we feel about this one? And this is a task a la BVP. If you know who BVP is. Do I need to clarify who BVP is? Bill Van Patten. So I'll give you a minute to read it. In step one, there are more items. I had to shorten it just to make it all fit here. But in step one, select how important the following items are. Things like lots of sun, exciting nightlife, and they have a scale. Then in step two, speak with at least 5 different classmates to find out how they responded to the items above, and be sure to jot down what they rated each other. And then in step 3 is the conclusion, looking at the responses, with which two do you think you would be most compatible traveling? Write the names and at least 3 reasons why. Okay, I'm seeing comments. Claudia loves, of course, Claudia is BVP's fan. I'm kidding. Yes, love the communicative purpose at the end. Interactive with lots of students. I like how there are open-ended options. Okay. You don't know what the others will say. Yes. Okay. Do we have any more thoughts about this? Yes. Katie, so a student could just say number 1, right? Not necessarily even ask questions, right? They could just be like, what did you answer? 1, 2, 2, 3, 4. Got it. Meaningful and engagement, push a student to speak. Okay. It feels like there's a task, there's a purpose, right? Looking for information. So we love the purpose. Yes, yes, yes. Thumbs up on the purpose. Yes. Requires maybe some critical thinking skills in terms of determining which 2 of the 5 would be the best and why. Yes. Okay. I'm trying to catch up on the comments. I'm sorry if I'm a little slow. Have to do something with the information. Yes. Did I miss anybody? Circulation signature searches. Oh, my students really dislike them, so I have stopped doing them. Tony, yeah, they were not working for me. In product is more presentational. Yes, yes, that's true. The final step, we did something with that information, and then they have to say why, maybe more, but then not necessarily a bad thing, right? So the interaction is happening in step 2. Okay, so we like it a lot, and yes, I like it too. My concern has to do more with what Katie said, which is what my students would say, right? They would not, they already know the items, so nobody is unsure of what the questions are going to be because everybody has the same items, and so it is quite possible that the students will simply say 1, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4. You know, that they would just simply check which items are, you know. So I don't know how much of interaction is going to happen, right? So that would be the only question mark that I have. Knowing my students, unless I am forcing them, and I don't like forcing them, unless I am forcing them to ask questions, most likely they will just compare ratings without talking too much, right? So that would be the only maybe what would happen with that, right? I think it's good for maybe one step before we get into like a full-on interpersonal, because we're giving them a lot of the input and we're guiding them a lot, and there's a purpose, right? It is wonderful. I would prefer for not to give them all of the items and everything to the point that all they're doing is reading, right? That would be the only thing where I have a question mark, that many of them will stay at reading. Okay, another example to unpack. Was there a question? Hang on. Yes, the easiest way, you would need to model it. You would need to like almost push them to interact in a certain way as opposed to the task lending itself to free-flowing interaction in a way, right? Most of them will probably stay at reading. Yeah. Okay. Another example to unpack. So in this case, the first one, student A, student B have different instructions once again. Student A, they're traveling to Buenos Aires. Why not? Because I'm from Buenos Aires. Your luggage is delayed. The airline has given you $40. I don't know if that's good or bad. To buy what you need for the next 2 days until your luggage arrives. Make a list of what you need. And then maybe try to select which ones that are really, really crucial because they may or may not be able to buy everything on the list. Then student B is the salesperson. There's a list of items they have in the store, which the teacher provides. In part of the preparation, while student A is doing the list, student B is working on the pricing the items, right? And you could have them look things up in that particular place, right? So it's a little bit more authentic than just random prices. Some students are like, a toothbrush is $200, right? There has to be something more realistic. The students interact to see if the student A can purchase everything or as much as possible from their list. And then the follow-up, maybe with the whole class, was someone able to buy everything? Which items were the most important? Did everybody buy? Any money left over? How did the prices compare, etc.? So what do we think about this activity or task? Conversation, discussion, purposeful, realistic, an exchange rate. Yes, you could. Go all the way, Glenn. Yes. Okay. Very relevant with our travel today. No kidding, huh, Caitlin? Yes. But would they give you $40? I don't know. Is that generous for airlines today? I don't know. Relevant, engaging. Okay. Maria Jose, right? They don't know. They don't even know the prices, so they need to pay attention. They need to consider how much money they have, how many items they can get. Okay, very thorough, Xiomara. Gracias. Must be an exchange back and forth, right? Yes, they need to stay under budget. Yes. Okay. Any other comments? Exactly, right? So if I'm asking, like, if I want to buy a toothbrush and you tell me that the toothbrushes are $20, ooh, what else could I get, right? I need to prioritize. I need to reanalyze the ones that I said are crucial and figure out what I could buy. I mean, hopefully it's not $20, but yeah. Okay, very good. And, you know, the step in the part of the teacher provides the list, of course, you can be strategic, right, in terms of what you include in that list. Glenn said that perhaps a challenging aspect could be confounding elements, right? So maybe if the students get lost a little bit in terms of where to get things. Now, there wouldn't be more than one place to get the items. Like, this is it. I have heard colleagues who extend it where the students are shopping around. You know, if you have all day to do the activity, have fun with it. Yes, they can shop around and go to different shops and try to get the best price. By all means, you know, you could add layers to it. In this case, it's just one student and one salesperson. That's it. You cannot go to another store, Glenn. I'm sorry. So it would be an example of what language level. Okay, good question, Wendy. Good question. I think it depends on what you're expecting. A lot of these things you could do at the probably novice high level, right? So if the students know some formulaic questions of how much, how big, I need, right? The types of things that we do, what ACFL considers survival, right? Exchanges, you could do with novice high students. They don't have to ask, look that it doesn't say ask full complete questions, get details. It doesn't say any of that. They just need to accomplish the task. So even if sometimes they just say words, it's okay. They're novice, right? It is the kind of conversation that they can have. Neri, I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly, said to extend it, right? Absolutely, right. And that is the thing. If you have student A research a department store, and of course you would, as the teacher, you would need to provide that for the student. They could have something more realistic, right, in terms of how much things cost in another country, and then you can expand it from there. Let me see. Oh, possibly reversing roles. Yeah, you could keep going, right? And I think that's wonderful. Task repetition is good, right? You can do it now, do it again, but this time reverse roles. Yes, that's not a problem. And with new students, right? For example, yes. Suzanne said, there's an internal purpose to the activity. It would be important to identify what happens in step 3. Oh, right. Yes, Suzanne. So this I had to really condense the instructions to fit them on the slide. So yeah, the purpose is to try to buy as many items as possible, staying on budget. So it's not just we did it, but it's just now we're going to share who was able to buy as many items as possible, right? And the students would see all of the steps. This is not like, surprise, now I do this. But the whole point is students that would see that in this task, student A needs to be able to buy as many items as possible. Were they able to accomplish that or not, right? So which items were, which items they didn't, right? Yes, yes, definitely. Okay. Now, let's keep going a little bit more. And I do want to clarify one thing that sometimes it didn't come up this time. And also a shameless plug, if I may, this activity is actually from Common Ground. So if you have Common Ground, this activity much more detailed and developed is in chapter 6 of Common Ground. Okay. Now, one comment I usually get with those types of tasks that is a role play, right? Students are pretending that their luggage was lost. The students are pretending to be sales people. And I give you that much. Yes, they're pretending, right? But to me, it's not a straightforward role play because even though there is a situation, the students are pretending to do something, the big difference for me is that in this task, there is a concrete outcome that goes beyond practicing language that the students need to accomplish, right? To try to buy as many items as possible. Role plays, on the other hand, tend to be purely about language practice. Going back to what Suzanne commented. Are we done? I guess we did it. Okay, I guess we're done because we finished. But there's very little that you can do as a follow-up because there was no other outcome other than completing the role play. I'm not saying it's good, bad. Let's not get into that whole discussion, right? But that is the difference that I see. So this is an example of a role play. Students get these role play cards, right? Student A is going to London for an interview. The friend lives there. You call the friend, they need to stay the night. Student B, is given a lot of this information. I like the last part. You hate having visitors, but you are a very polite person. And then what do? The student A says, hey, how are you? I am, and then they can even read the first, going to London for a job interview next week and can't afford a hotel. They're just reading from their card. Then maybe student B says, oh, okay, that's too bad. The student A then responds, can I stay with you? And student B, I guess they have to. It says you are a very polite person. So I guess they could say, yes, it's a small flat, but yes, I can help you. And then what do? Right? You have that sense of, I guess now we're done, right? It is hard to think of the follow-up. What can you ask as a follow-up? That to me is the telltale sign of a straightforward role play. Now, can we, like parentheses, can students have fun with language and act? And yes, I have no problem with that. Students creating their own skits and acting things out and laughing in class, I have no problem with that. So this is not about good or bad. Just want to clarify that. But to me, if there is no purpose, in this case, I don't think it's entertainment either, right? So, but at least there has to be a purpose, at least entertainment being a purpose. In this case, this is straightforward language practice, just practice talking. What might affect performance? I think it's good whenever you create activities for students to do together. A lot of the things that came up in the chat, beautiful, because that's exactly what we need to start anticipating. Things that could affect performance are the topic. Sometimes the students don't find it interesting or relatable, and so they don't have anything to say. It's not that they don't have the language skills. It's not that the task was unclear. It's just, I don't have anything to say about that topic. We were talking about gardening on Twitter, because, you know, that's what people do on Twitter. They talk about gardening. And a colleague from England suggested a decision-making task on designing a garden. And I told him I would be so bad at it that I think all I would say is put plants wherever you want. Are we done with the task? Because I have no interest and no eye for gardening. So sometimes it's the topic, it's not necessarily the task or the linguistic level of the students. Confusing, frustrating instructions, like Glenn maybe pointed out, are they going to get confused, like which department store? Good, that's the type of thing we need to start anticipating. Too much, too fast. We do this all the time. I know I do it. I move way too fast from input to output, and especially output to interpersonal, right? Sometimes we need to slow it down and spend a lot more time on that input part and some of that presentational before we move on to the interpersonal. Sometimes forced interactional patterns can affect performance. If you're asking them things like only speak in complete sentences and make sure you use irregular verbs and do this and do that, that is going to affect how well they do. And the last thing that I want you to think about is how many of these tasks are easy for teachers, but they're hard for learners or hard for a novice level learners. And the classic example of that is a decision-making task. When you think about it from the point of view of a learner, and especially a novice learner, it's much easier to just agree with everybody and everything than to disagree. So why wouldn't you just agree with whatever your partner is saying and then be done with the task? Now, we as teachers are very good at negotiating and keeping the conversation going. What about this? Do you like that? We cannot expect the students to have that kind of training or the students to have that kind of attitude towards the task. The disposition towards the task is different, right? So we need to put ourselves in their shoes. I would not do a decision-making task with novice learners unless it is super structured, more input-based, right? With things where they need to be doing little decisions one by one. Even intermediate level learners will need some structure, things that they need to keep in mind, some kind of constraints, because otherwise it's so easy to just go, what about this? Okay, what about that? Okay, right? It's just easier to agree. And yes, they will need something they care about. If they don't care about the task itself and the topic, it's just hard to engage in a lot of this disagreement and negotiation with a partner, right? Because if you just don't care, it's like me with the garden. You just don't care, then you just agree and whatever you say is good enough for me, right? The other thing that I want to point out is, which I talked about novice and intermediate, and I am using ACTFL proficiency levels. And the one thing, if you look at the guidelines of ACTFL for speaking, and yes, ACTFL just calls it speaking. They don't call it interpersonal, but it's the implied that speaking is interpersonal. The one thing that you'll notice is how the dependence on the interlocutor changes throughout the levels. The closer we are to novice, the more we depend on our interlocutor, meaning that it's primarily reactive. They don't initiate a lot of the conversation or the questions, rarely initiate, not never, but very rarely, right? And many times novice learners repeat language provided by the interlocutor. ACTFL calls them parrots, right? And you'll see that your students do that. You ask them a question and maybe they repeat one part of it, or sometimes part of the prompt, right? They need that support of something, someone else. The further away we get from novice, the less we rely on our interlocutor, the more we can be, we can initiate questions and conversation as opposed to simply react to what we're being asked. As I said, in terms of interlocutors, students can interact with, and they do in a class, right? They interact with many different types of interlocutors, and I'm just focusing just for today on classmates. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about interaction with the instructor as well as interaction with other speakers of the language. So what would you say are some pros and cons of peer interaction in pairs or peer interaction in small groups? If somebody wants to chat or put something in the chat real quick, what is the pro, what is the con of having students interact with each other? What comes to mind? Ah, Chris, yes. They don't use the target language. Yep. Immediate accountability. Yes. A little bit more complex if with more people, maybe more variety, but sometimes that, you know, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? That could be the other, revert to English, right? They don't use the target language. Potential con, same level of knowledge. So maybe there's not a whole lot of negotiation because sometimes they can't help each other. Okay. Very good. All right. I love everything you're saying. Yes. Okay. So a lot of these are concerns that I anticipated and I have my slides prepared and ready for you. Yes. So the first concern of learner-learner interaction is that they learn each other's errors, right? So if one student provides the wrong form of something, then the other student is going to learn it. Now, the interesting thing is that research on learner-learner interaction has not exactly shown this. And what I mean is that it's not that it doesn't happen. It's not that they will never learn something that someone else said, but usually the learners tend to need a lot more input with that particular form to say that they actually learned it. And many times they know that their partner didn't quite say the right thing, but they just don't say anything to be polite. But when you do a post-test, you'll see that they did not accept that suggestion, but they were polite during interaction and they didn't tell them, hey, I don't think that's right. And the other thing that I always ask back when somebody says that they learn each other's errors is, do teachers provide error-free language? Because the underlying assumption of this tends to be that the learners provide errors, but teachers don't. I do. I don't always speak error-free. I have observed many classes where the teacher may, you know, make an error with gender agreement. And it's not that the students are now, you know, fossilized forever and ever, will never understand gender agreement, right? So sometimes I feel like we are trying to make these direct connections between one non-target like form and then acquired forever. And it just doesn't quite work that way, right? They would need repeated interaction with that particular non-target like form to then acquire a non-target like form. I hope it makes sense what I'm trying to say. So we shouldn't be so afraid that one student is going to say one thing wrong and then, oof, you ruined my interlanguage. It doesn't work that way, right? The other concern is they won't stay on task or they won't use the target language. That is a very, very valid concern. What I would ask back to understand better is, are the students motivated to do so? And by motivated, I mean different things. Yes, it could be interest, as an interest in the topic. It could be. But also, do they see a clear purpose for exchanging this information? Sometimes if it's just straight up practice, they lose interest very quickly and then they don't stay on task. So do they have a concrete purpose for exchanging this information? And then the other form of motivation is, do they see a connection with everything else around the course? So if my students know that they will never be asked to interact with each other or even interact with me as part of an assessment, they're not going to be very motivated to stay in the target language while interacting with others. So you need to know your learners and make sure that they understand why you're asking them to do this particular task, right? In terms of connection with other components, and then a purpose for the task itself. even then, some of them may use English here and there. I think, you of course, your policies better than anybody. I don't have a problem, depending on the task, for the students to switch and use English to help each other out. I don't have a problem. Now, for some things, I tell them, just try. Just try, even if you can give me some words, but just try your best to convey your ideas in Spanish. So it depends very much on the task, right? A third concern that I hear a lot is that one student's performance affects the other. And yes, yes, it does. Our interactional patterns always are affected by our interlocutors, right? If our interlocutors are nodding and seem interested, it changes how we interact. If our interlocutors seem bored and don't even say anything, then we say less, right? So this is inevitable that always our interactional patterns will be affected by the interlocutor. So the question is, are we talking about assessment? And if we are, then what are we expecting? What do we expect exactly to happen? Sometimes, again, I think we're putting expectations of what we would do, but we need to put ourselves in their shoes. Sometimes if they just say one thing, the other person says another thing, and that's good enough for them, is that realistic for the task, right? So you need to figure out how much of it is the task, how much of it is what we're expecting the students to do. Are our expectations perhaps unrealistic for the level? And then, yeah, the bigger question to me is paired interaction the best form of assessment? I don't use pair interaction as assessment for novice learners. I would never do that. I understand that, some of the constraints and, in terms of you need to have the students interact with each other because you cannot interact with them even in small groups. But I would say maybe try to figure out, if it is an assessment of interpersonal communication, figure out an alternative where you can be involved in that conversation as opposed to leaving the students on their own. And then all you're doing is evaluating them. Unless they're more advanced learners, we need to understand what a learner can do at different levels on their own, right? So for me, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow, for assessment, I prefer to be involved in that conversation in some way. And then concern number 4 is that they don't negotiate anything, that they just take turns talking. And I have seen this. Especially when it's something like a paired assessment, and that each learner takes their turn saying things, but they're not truly paying attention to what someone else is saying because they're too nervous. They just want to show what they can do themselves. But they also don't want to affect their partner, right? So we need to consider the whole context here. So sometimes it is a task effect. The task is not designed to promote a lot of negotiation, and that's okay. That's the way the task is. Even if there were monolingual native speakers doing that task, you may not get a lot of negotiation. That has to do with the task. It doesn't have to do with the students. And sometimes it has to do with the expectations that we have for their level. If they're novice learners, they're not going to have beautifully, pragmatically great reactions to what someone else is saying. It just doesn't happen, right? They're going to be more telegraphic, right? And getting their point across and maybe smile. There's other ways in which they may react to what someone is saying, but they're not going to have, a lot of this negotiation of, did you mean this or did you mean that? They're not going to do it. The students are not going to do it, right? That's something that we might do, but the students may not. And I have to tell you, even in my research, when the students are giving feedback to each other, they're so completely brutally direct with each other. No, that's not right. I don't think that's right. I mean, they just say it, right? There's no recasting. There's no clarification request. It's just straightforward. I don't think that's right. So when we're designing paired interaction in class, what I would like you to remember is for it to be purposeful and also guided, but not unnatural. So they need to be accountable for paying attention to what their partner is saying, so that mainly that they exchanged information and they stayed on task. Guided but not unnatural that's where I would say avoid too many restrictions. Let them be a little bit more in control of the language that they choose, the language tools that they choose to communicate. So instead of saying things like use only complete sentences, even when we're having conversations with our friends, we don't consciously say, I'm only going to be using complete sentences. It's just not how communication works. Same with at least 2 irregular verbs. I understand you want them to use the tools you gave them, but think of it more in terms of, do they see a relevance, a natural, inherent relevance in the tools we're giving them, as opposed to forcing them to use tools we gave them. In terms of guiding them, I would say, try to always connect it back to input. Even intermediate learners, but especially novice learners, they're going to have recent and relevant input that they can then use as part of their interaction. Not just reading, right? So remember that I know you want to guide them, but not give them everything they need to say to each other, right? So if they're just doing dictation, that's not interpersonal communication. And then increase spontaneity gradually. A lot of what they do in novice level is training wheels, and that's perfectly okay. And they're going to be with training wheels for a while. We cannot do one activity where it's very guided training wheels, and now here comes the assessment, and it's, you know, do the Tour de France. I mean, you can't go from one to the next. So one example that we have in Common Ground in chapter 1, as you can see, we give them some of the input at the beginning, but then they just have to write 2 more things there. Then they're going to be interviewing their classmate to confirm their predictions. And then they're going to wrap it all up in terms of how well they know each other, how predictable their routines are. You can also, of course, do different things in terms of then what trends are there in class, everybody wakes up before what time, right? And things like that. In terms of increasing spontaneity, maybe in this case, you see that in step 2, we gave them time to write the questions. Well, maybe when you are trying to get them to, you know, say more without so much support, maybe write the questions down, but then put them away while they're interacting. So they have that time to prepare, but they're not just reading. And eventually, of course, we want them to get to the point of maybe think about what you can ask, but not write it down, right? But we're going to get there eventually. We can't just go from one activity to now all of a sudden do it completely on your own. They're going to need those training wheels for a while. And speaking of training wheels, I know that chat mats are very popular, more in K-12 than in higher ed. And chat mats are these graphics where you are putting information that the learners may need during the conversation. And what I like is that they tend to be a little bit more useful language than what you might expect in a textbook, right? Where you get every single possible word associated with travel, and it's too much. This is more focused, right? And I do like that a lot. I think they're fantastic as training wheels to support the completion of an interpersonal task. So that students don't have to remember everything. So being able to have this reference, I think it's great. Eventually, at some point, yes, we do want to know how much they can do on their own without the chat mat. So eventually, yes, at some point, we do want to take that away and see how much they can do on their own. But to support the completion of the interpersonal task, I think they're great. Notice that it's not the task itself, right? A chat mat is not a task itself. It's not like here's a chat mat, talk to each other. Then there's no point, right? Then we're not sure what we're asking. We're just asking to practice. But if it's supporting an interpersonal task, then yes, by all means, use them. So I know that I only have 4 minutes, so we don't have enough time to unpack this. But this is a classic textbook interpersonal activity. This is, I think I took this from a textbook, right? Where the students are just working in pairs and all they're told to do is ask each other questions about the topic. And then they're told, be sure to ask follow-up questions. If these are novice learners, they're going to need a lot more support than simply ask each other questions and then ask follow-up questions. Usually what happens is they start using English, right? They don't stay on task, or they don't just, stay with the target language. They're going to need a purpose. Why are we exchanging this information? Because that will help me understand what kind of questions I need to ask you. And then also they're going to need a little bit more of that support, maybe a chat mat, maybe some ideas of items that they could ask, right? So maybe they have to ask first about food, then ask about activities, then ask about this. You need to guide them a little bit more. So the next session tomorrow, we're going to talk about interaction with the instructor, and then we're going to talk about interaction with other speakers of the target language. So connecting students with other people who speak the target language. And we're going to talk a little bit about assessment, and especially in terms of rubrics and the types of tasks that you can do for assessment. And I think you need to leave feedback after the session, and then also after tomorrow. Do they get entered on the twice?
Okay, so let me explain. So Florencia, thank you so much for the first session today. It was wonderful. I personally learned a lot. That was really cool. So the way that the feedback form works, you can fill it out today, you can fill it out tomorrow, you can even fill it out another time. You get up to 3 entries in our giveaway for a $50 gift card to Target, and you can earn 1 more entry if you tweet about a session or anything about the 2022 PD Extravaganza using our hashtag Extempore PD. So 4 different ways to earn an entry, 3 of them coming from the feedback, which of course not only is good for the giveaway, but also for giving Dr. Henshaw some feedback on the workshop today.
Okay, and I think there's a question. I see a question from Claudia. What do you think about asking students to discuss as a form of an interactional task? Yeah, Claudia, I mean, even with, the conversation course where the students are very motivated, if the prompt is just discuss, you're going to get a lot of this. You say something, I say something, right? But there's not a lot of the negotiation exchange. It seems more like we're taking turns presenting our viewpoints. And so it is, to me, it always needs something else. I got to give them something else. It's got to be some purpose why I'm asking them to discuss it, right? So I think it's nice to maybe tie it to a decision-making task, tie it to a presentational task, or not necessarily, maybe the other way around. And this is something that I'll talk about tomorrow, because I know that ACTFL, if you do IPAs, the order, usually interpersonal is in the middle for some reason, and then comes presentational. And if you saw Common Ground, you'll see that I do the opposite, right? Because presentational, there's more time, there's more preparation. And then the hardest one is interpersonal. So the more time we have until we get into the interpersonal, to me, is better, especially if it's going to be pairs. But what I was going to say is that if you do something like, maybe the presentational is something like a gallery walk type activity, and then the students can discuss so they can vote on the best one. Or maybe the presentational is a pitch, like Shark Tank type pitch, and then the students in their own groups are like they're the judges, and they have to share what they like, dislike. But at least it's more connected. There's more of a purpose, and there's an outcome that comes out of that discussion. It's not just discuss, and when you're done, right? They need more structure and a purpose. Novice learners, no, I would never just tell them discuss a topic. If you ask me right now to discuss something in Italian, I would have a panic attack and would not be able to say 1 sentence. No, I need more structure. Yeah. And that's one of the things I was going to say next time, but I'll say it today too. That part of it is you need to experience being a language learner yourself. I think that's one of the best professional development that you can do, and especially for interpersonal communication. Remember what it's like to have a conversation in another language when you are a novice level learner. That feeling goes away with time. You gotta get back to it and remember what it's like, especially that I think there's no problem, of course, if you do, input-based classes, right? And that's also very good. But sometimes we get so comfortable with, look how much I can understand. Oh, no, go have a conversation with somebody. And that's what you really remember what it's like to be a novice level student. Just for fun, I'll tell you, I went to dinner with a friend, and she's she's native like in Italian. And she wanted to help me by talking to me in Italian. And I think after maybe the first 3 minutes, I started answering in English. And so she says to me in Italian, like, what are you doing? Answer it to me in Italian. And I said, no way, this is exhausting. I don't know how we tell our students to do this for 50 minutes, because I'm like, I can't, like my head cannot. So do it if you can, even if it's a language that you took a long time ago. Just try to see what it's like to have a short conversation with somebody, and you'll understand what some of your students are going through. Were there questions that I'm missing? I'm seeing a lot of comments. IPAs, yeah, we'll talk about IPAs next time. Okay, did I miss anything? Hang on.
I think maybe Dora's question. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I'm seeing it now. The last part, that if it's a summative assignment, what do you think is okay to require these restrictions to informative tasks? That is a good question, Dora. I do a little bit, not the extreme of 2 irregular verbs, one from this page. I don't go to that extreme, but I do, for example, and I'll talk about this tomorrow, the extempore questions, I tell them, try to give me 2 sentences, I tell them that. And then some other words, that's okay, but try to see if you can give me 2 sentences. And some students only give me 1 and they get partial credit, but it has to be an achievable challenge. I still want to try to push them to sort of stretch their interlanguage, as Swain would say, but not unnatural to the point of you need to use 2 different verbs. I mean, if you are answering on the spot and trying to remember the content of what you want to say, and then on top of that, trying to remember that I use different verbs, that is cognitive overload. That doesn't really help. You know what I mean? So I might tell them that, or maybe things like, okay, I'll talk more tomorrow. I know we are completely out of time, but I promise I'll talk about what I do with Extempore tomorrow.
Florencia, thank you so much. Thank you all to everyone who attended. This recording will be up and viewable within the next few hours.
And I'll share the copy of the slides too. I forgot to say that. I'll put them in Sketch. Yep,
they'll be on Sketch, and you can access them there. And we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place, same channel, right, Florencia?
Yes.
12 p.m. Central Time. See you then. Take care.
Bye.